It's time for Pure Performance.
Get your stopwatches ready. It's time for Pure Performance with Andy Grabner and Brian Wilson. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Pure Performance COVID-19 edition. This is your host, Brian Wilson, and as always, I have with me the lovely and talented Andy Grabner. Andy Grabner, how are you doing today?
I'm good. Why are you snoozing me? What's wrong with you? What do you want to get in return? Shall I say some nice words about you as well?
No, I want to get a captain environment. No, I always think about a lot of times on the nighttime shows, right? Whenever they introduce a male guest, it's the esteemed whatever, and almost every single time a female guest is introduced, it's always the lovely and something. I'm like, that's always odd. So I wanted to introduce you as a male as the lovely and talented Mr. Andy Grabner, because you are lovely and talented.
Oh, well, I try to be, and that's what my wife keeps telling me from time to time. So I think it's all right. And also, you mentioned earlier, it's the first COVID edition, even though when this airs, COVID hopefully is beyond us. Well, who knows? But it's the first time we actually record while we're all quarantined, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's been around. We've known about it since at least before Perform. But you're right. This is quarantine edition, right? Quarantine in place. But I'm sure people are sick of hearing everything about that. So let's give them a break from that. Unless we have, want to make fun of any of our leaders for the poor jobs they're doing. But we can leave that off because this isn't a political podcast either. Okay. We actually have a fun show today. Right. Remember a while back, I forget which episode it was. Maybe our guest remembers. But there was an episode we had where we said, it'd be great to hear about like failures, right? Because we hear a lot of people talking about, I think we might have been talking to Gene Kim, and we were talking about hearing about all the success stories of DevOps transformations and all these real great pipelines, but we never quite hear about when things go wrong and maybe what you learn from it. Because it's always, things are allowed to go wrong, but we always want to learn a thing or two from that. And we had one of our old guests contact me again and said, "Oh, I've got some great stories. I'd love to be back on." So that's what we're doing today. Hopefully it'll be a fun episode, to put everyone's mind in a more fun place. Andy, would you like to go ahead and do the honors of introducing our guest who is on mute, or he might have disconnected?
Well, I hope he's still there with us, but so Justin Donohoo, hopefully I correctly pronounced that name. I didn't check back in I think it was episode 69 that we had him on, where we talked about serverless, and I'm not pretty sure, I don't remember if I pronounced his name correctly last time. I'm pretty sure he introduced himself the last time, but because I'm not sure if everybody listens to that episode back then, Justin, could you do us a favor? First of all, thanks for being on the show. Give us a little background about yourself, and then it would be really interesting then to dig deeper into what kind of stories you have to share about things that actually went wrong and what we can learn from it.
Yeah, so it's Donohoo, so you're pretty close. I mean,
kind of like Don Ho, tiny bubbles.
Exactly.
There you go.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely good to be back. I mean, I've always loved to talk about this and spending time with Dynatrace, and I actually get to work with Brian because we're in the same market, so that's kind of interesting. And then I saw both of you at Perform.
And you were sick back then?
Dude, that was horrible. I'm wondering if I was patient zero for Utah, because it was nuts when I got home.
You might have
but yeah, I mean, quick background about me, though, is I'm the founder and CTO of Observian. We're an advanced AWS partner and a premier Google partner. We also spend a lot of time in the software delivery space, and APM is part of our core strategy. That's why we're partner with Dynatrace. And, kind of a quick backstory to me before I jump in too far is a lot of the examples I'm going to talk about today are from my last job, where I spent 5+ years doing nothing but failing and failing fast, and realizing the more I learned about doing cloud computing. I've been doing it about 10 years, but I spent almost 4.5 years at my last job. The more I did it, the more I realized I really don't know what the heck people are doing or what we're doing. And by the end of it all, it was kind of the event that started Observian at the end. It was like, that was really hard. Went through a lot of things. Why is it so painful? Instead of just getting a job at a single place, why not start up somewhere that I can help many people learn from all the mistakes I made? So, I mean, this is right up my alley with the whole reason why Observian exists.
Mm-hmm. Hey, when you said, so you failed fast and often, but obviously, hopefully you learned a lot and recovered. Was this the intention in the beginning because you just didn't know much better about the cloud technologies, or it was okay to fail fast, or it just happened because you simply had no clue what you were doing?
I'd say it's an elegant combo of both incompetence and being agile in the cloud. Mm-hmm. I basically inherited quite a mess. So, I mean, my last company I was at, it was called Ghostery. It was a privacy plugin tool, still around today. And then we also had an enterprise business that was doing a lot of the cutting edge digital advertising alliance, interest-based advertising. So we were kind of on the forefront of digital privacy. And when I took over, I started there as an hourly contractor. It was only supposed to be like a 3 to 6 month gig, and I ended up leaving as their head of tech. So it was definitely a great experience. But I had multiple AWS accounts that were VPC Classic. So they all had public IPs. We had pick a database. We had it in production. Pick a programming language. We probably had it. We even had like Haskell running in production. Mm-hmm. We had a 1,200 plus node Hadoop cluster. It was pretty nuts. So some of it was inheriting it. A lot of it was, not knowing what you don't know. And then some of it towards the end was definitely fail fast and often because it's a lot cheaper than failing in production. But I've got a lot of these stories that are production failures. So, I mean, one of the things I like to talk about is, on the surface, it's like, oh yeah, you started a cloud company, this time of year, or not year, I guess in this day and age, it's got to be a great industry to be in. I was like, it might look that way, but it wasn't all glitz and glamour. Definitely have a ton of battle scars. So that's why I was excited to talk about this episode.
Mm-hmm. So, first of all, I want to say earlier when I said you just didn't know better, it's just, it happens, I think, to all of us when we pick something, when we pick up a new technology, a new framework or something, it feels like, man, why am I wasting so much time, and then looking back on what I did in the morning when it's the end of the day, and it's like, man, if I would have known this in the morning, I would have, saved so much time. And then obviously when you look back even further, and it's like, man, now I need to redo this all again because I didn't know how to do this properly. So I guess these are a lot of these learnings. Now, from it, tell us a little bit about, some examples on what went wrong because you didn't know better. What would you have liked to know, and what should other people that are moving towards the cloud and the kind of find themselves in a similar situation where you found yourself back then, what should they know? What can you teach them?
Yeah, so I mean, with the Dunning-Kruger effect, right? The more you know about something, the more you realize you actually don't know anything, right? Mm-hmm. When you first start touching, I'll just pick on AWS today because I think that's the easiest to talk about because people know what services I'm talking about. I spin up an email and I have access to thousands of dollars per click, depending on what buttons I click, with no Clippy trying to help us out saying hey, did you know? It's just sign up and go, right? And so a lot of people, like my predecessor, took the approach of, oh, it's just VMs. How hard can it be? It's like, well, it's actually pretty hard. So kind of where I start when I'm talking with customers and just my own story is I like to talk about the cloud adoption / maturity model. And it's really a 3-phased approach that I've seen people approach cloud. And it's, step 1, data center in the sky. it's probably the worst way to do cloud. Everything's a static asset. We still have pets. We give, servers names that mean something like, oh, that's Web01, right? And everything is on demand, and we're just taking on-prem concepts and running them in the cloud. So a lot of time that's a lift and shift. I mean, I'm not saying lift and shift is bad always. Sometimes, there's a data center being shut down or whatever that, makes you do a lift and shift. Once you do a lift and shift, you start to realize, wow, this is really expensive, and it starts to fall apart on you pretty quick. Or you start to move more into using managed services and starting to actually use things like auto scaling and use the cloud for kind of what it was designed for. And then the third and final phase, where I actually try to get people to start on day zero, based off my experience, is doing infrastructure as code and doing more of the autonomous cloud management that Dynatrace talks about. Because I can't tell you how many customers, and even, myself, we started out, it's building stuff in the console, and yeah, it sucks is the nicest way of putting it. Like, infrastructure as code, like, you want to start with that on day zero if possible, because you're not going to ever regret it, because it's, something that's safe and repeatable. But then if you don't do it, when the time comes for DR or to move into another region, you're going to regret it, because you're playing like Indiana Jones with two consoles side by side, right? And hoping that you can recreate what was created months ago with no documentation. So that's kind of where we start. But I mean, some of these stories that I've got a lot around big data, account strategy. So there's just so many things that we did. I mean, keep in mind, I feel like part of the reason we were successful is I had a lot of, leadership that was able to kind of take a chance on me. I was like 20 something years old at the time. Mm-hmm. And they gave me a shot. I ended up being the head of tech out of it. I had a good team that stuck with me and followed me. 5 of the guys on my team at Observian are from Ghostery as well. So we've all been together 2 or 3 companies each. So we've got a good team dynamic, because you know how it is. You go through the trenches with people, you get pretty good bonds, right?
Yeah.
And so like let's just start with account strategy, right? One of the first things that we try to do at Observian is help customers with a multi-account strategy where they've got, like a logging account, security account, master payer account, maybe production and not production. Maybe we break it down by business line. But there's a reason, there's a story behind this. So a lot of people in the early days, myself included, I mean, some of the accounts I inherited were, we have, one massive account that has all of our cloud assets for the entire company. And if you're lucky, sometimes people would separate by VPC. And then the idea was, I've got a dev VPC and a prod VPC, so my resources are isolated. But that starts to break down really fast. I mean, there's multiple reasons why this breaks down. When we start talking cost, right? Like, how much does product X cost to host? I can't really tell you. I'm like, well, here's the dev cost, staging, production. Here's 4 other products. Data transfer is blended, data storage is blended. And so if we can, really break down our accounts into smaller, more manageable units, we get better numbers from that aspect, like especially if you're a SaaS startup, cost of goods sold, all that stuff. But the bigger problem is, say a developer is like, hey, I need admin access because I'm trying to troubleshoot something or I'm trying to figure something out. Well, if I'm all in one account and I elevate that person, they're now an admin across the entire environment. So I don't know how you're going to pass any type of audit. Like, you just gave somebody, prod access. And so when we were at Ghostery, so we had these 2 messy accounts. We're like, oh, we're going to create 2 new shiny accounts. And by the time we created the new shiny accounts and we migrated the resources, we realized the mistake. We went from a single account that had everything in a giant VPC. It was all public because it was before EC2, so it was all EC Classic. And we ended up just creating 2 bigger buckets that were, one was for our consumer business line, one was for our commercial and enterprise business line. But we still kept dev and production in the same account. And when it came time to get audited, that's where we were like, oh, we did this wrong. So we had to redo the redo. Mm-hmm. There's a big story behind all this that I didn't really jump into. I'll kind of jump around a little bit. So part of the reason this is a topic I'm so passionate about is we got put in an interesting situation where, we were the tech startup where we had the hyper growth up and to the right. We were hiring people like crazy. People are using our product. We won a demo award at Demo 2014. It was just great, right? All the good stuff. Well, then one of our big customers that happened to rhyme with Oogle was no longer a customer. And so we lost a fair chunk of revenue. But through all of this growth, our cloud spend was rapidly growing up and to the right as well. So, we went from probably, I want to say in the early days, 50 to 75,000 a month, all the way up to $500,000 a month.
Wow.
And we just took a significant hit on revenue. And so we were also at this awkward inflection point where our VC was, you're in year 8, we do 10-year funds. You need to start looking to sell and be self-sufficient because, it's time to exit the fund. And so we were going into fundraising mode. And so the writing was on the wall. This wasn't going to be a fun situation. It was going to be either we find fundraising or we're going to have to lay off like 30, 40% of our staff. And this isn't me trying to say that I can predict things. I kind of looked at the numbers and I saw the cloud spend. And I was like, if we don't get ahead of this cloud spend problem, it's going to be more like 50 or 60% of our people.
Mm-hmm.
And long story short, we ended up being romanced in a due diligence. We're at the point where we're about to get acquired. We had joint press releases. It was like that much a done deal. We had a site that had both companies announcing what was going to happen. And then they pulled the deal the day before.
Wow.
And so that was 6 months of fundraising and we were running our cost really high. And again, SaaS startup, we were focused on feature development, not the operational reduction. And so it ended up being my team went from 70 people to 25 people in a day.
Wow.
And then the company as a whole, we probably hit about 60%. And so that's why I talk about this and try to help customers avoid these mistakes. Because I had to lay off a ton of friends that day. And it got to the point where I was telling people, it's got to be some of us or all of us because there was no other way out. And instead of packing up and, quitting and being frustrated, myself and a couple guys that were, lifelong friends now, we were able to take that $500,000 a month and spend and get it all the way down to about $150K a month.
Wow.
With a reduced team.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why I say I got a lot of topics here because so go ahead and jump in.
Yeah, I want to ask you a question on this. So first of all, thanks for sharing that story and being so open about it. But let me understand. So the cloud costs grew. Why? Is it because people were just creating cloud instances and resources and services and not taking care of also shutting them down in case they didn't need it anymore? Or was it more you were kind of scaling up your operations because you were obviously very successful for a long time? And then when this big customer dropped, you had no way to scale down because the architecture didn't support it or because you forgot about it? Or why couldn't you just, if you lose a big customer and you don't need these resources anymore in production, why couldn't you just scale down and basically then serve the rest of the customers with the resources that they need and therefore bring the cost in balance?
So these are all good questions. The easiest way to describe this is some of our biggest costs were our big data problems. So every day we were producing 25 terabytes of new data every single day. And the way it was coming in, at first it would come in through these collector instances, and then it would get written to S3, and then it would get loaded into a Hadoop cluster, and it would do some basic map reduce. Then it would go into another cluster for more fine-grained reduction, aggregation, and then it would go off into a reporting warehouse. And the problem with the nature of our data set, so you were running a browser plugin, and if you opted in to send data, basically it would send data back every single time that person went to a different website.
Mm-hmm.
And it would basically be different customers would be paying for access to, we called it the panel data, so it's the real user data.
Mm-hmm.
So they could see, what third parties were on their website, how was it being impacted, was there data leakage, all of that. And so this was a massive data set because they'd want, historical reports. And so it's not like with the business, yes, we lost a customer, but we didn't lose any consumers, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so the customers that were paying for access to the consumer data, again, this was all voluntary opt-in, they still wanted that data.
Mm-hmm.
And then on the privacy side, a lot of the data that we were doing was when you see interest-based advertisements online, like there's a little blue shark up in the top left corner for ad choices.
Mm-hmm.
We were serving those icons. So we were getting billions of impressions a day. So one customer leaving, it had an impact, but to the overall data set, not really. We probably went from 27 terabytes a day to maybe 26, because we were basically 25 to 30 depending on the day. I just always averaged about 25.
Okay, I guess I didn't fully understand what a customer means and what he's kind of consuming versus producing of data. Now I understand better that how your service worked back then, and I understand now that if you lose a customer, you're not losing that data, because basically they're just consuming the service.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then we had an interesting connection with Dynatrace. So some of the people at Ghostry came from Gomez, and as you know, Gomez was one of your guys' acquisitions. Mm-hmm. And so we also had our own third-party scanner that was, what we were doing was we weren't trying to be an APM by any means, right? What we were doing is we were focusing on the problem of third-party JavaScript on your website that you're not in control of, and what's the side effect it has on your website? Does it make your page slow? Are they leaking data? Do you even know about them? It's data governance, right? And then we were on kind of the cutting edge of GDPR, and some of those stuff, our in-house counsel was part of, the conversations with the regulators that drafted GDPR. And so we had a web crawler too. And it was indexing third-party JavaScript all across the internet. So we were probably scanning 40 to 50 million web pages a week. Mm-hmm. And so the scale that we were doing some of this stuff was crazy. And so one of the things I talk about a lot is, big data causes big problems. And it was, we were dealing with so much data, and the business and the demand, everybody wants the same experience, right? That they are on Uber or Google, right? I click on an email and it pops up instantly. It's well, yeah, that's kilobits of data. And so I would have requests from our customer reports team, or customers buying data feeds. They want to be able to run a historical data query for, a 2-year period across 10,000 domains, and they'd be upset that it would take 20 minutes. It's well, do you know how much data that is? Mm-hmm. And so then we had this drive for, hey, it needs to be, I can query whatever I want, I'm not going to tell you when, and it just needs to be snappy and on demand. So that pushed us into starting to do things like standing up our own Presto clusters. Mm-hmm. And we really started pushing really hard there. And at the end of the day, our Amazon account rep was hey, stop what you're doing. Come help us develop Athena. So we were one of the first customers on Athena. We were actually helping close bug tickets and stuff. So we were in production on Athena before it was general availability. We also did the same thing with Aurora. So getting in more into direct failures. So we had a data pipeline project where the original data pipeline that was going from, land going to one Hadoop cluster, going to another Hadoop cluster. Those nodes were on 24/7, whether they were being used or not. And in some cases, we had so many jobs stacked up that we were like having to add nodes. And sometimes if one job was delayed, we were taking longer than 24 hours to process 24 hours of data. So you can see how that's a problem really quick. We would basically bump up to 18 hours every single day. So it was getting pretty scary. So the way we approached that was, hey, let's start spinning up dynamic EMR clusters. So we were trying to basically spin up an EMR cluster and use it for just that one moment and then get rid of it. That was kind of the model we started with, and then eventually we ended up in Athena. But as we were going through this project of redoing our data pipeline, no sacred cow existed. The old cluster that we were on was like Cloudera 0.2. And this was at this time, I want to say 2014, 2015. And so it was way out of date. And so that was like your original question, like how much of it was, we don't know, how much of it was, intentional failure. And a lot of it was tech debt. I mean, there was multiple tech regimes that had gone through there, and it was kind of a mess. And as we were doing this, that whole infrastructure as code thing I'm bringing up, we had somebody, I'm not going to name their name, they know who they are though, decided they wanted to spin up a Presto cluster to do some tests on Presto because they read a lot of good things about it. And I was like, yeah, go for it. Well, I didn't realize that I just basically told them to go spin up a 200 node Presto cluster on a Friday. And I was like, okay, sweet, do your test and kill it. Well, they didn't kill it. I came in Monday morning and I spent $30,000 on this cluster. And I was like, wait, what? Wow. They left it. So literally they spun up like a 200 node Presto cluster. They ran tests for a few hours and then they just kind of forgot about it. Like, it's just 200 nodes. How much is that going to cost? Well, apparently $10,000 a day.
Oh, man.
So again, when I say failures, like that's just raw negligence, right? That's my bad. It's the team's bad. We should have had billing alarms. There's so many things that went bad. Plus we were working crazy hours, tons of stress. But I mean, these are the types of failures I'm talking about. Like people don't talk about this. When we got to the end though, like if I just told you I took our AWS bill from 500K to like 100K, you'd be like, oh wow, you're amazing. It's like, not exactly.
Let me ask you though, with that situation with Presto, I mean, your 200 nodes, people not shutting things down. Have you figured out a way to mitigate that? Has Amazon or other cloud providers put in any guardrails? I know you mentioned Clippy early on, which I appreciate the Clippy reference, but is there anything since then that you've figured out either, from your own best practices or anything that the cloud providers make available to you to avoid that kind of mistake now, right? Because I can see that happening early on in the cloud stuff, but there's got to be something at this point.
Well, there's a lot of things, right? I feel like anytime I turn on, there's a cloud something tool. It's Cloud Health, Cloud Ability, Cloud Checker. There's a bunch of them, right? So there's definitely cost tools. The problem with cost tools, though, they're analyzing cost after you've already spent it.
Yeah.
Service limits exist for a reason, but going back to that multi-account strategy, if I have smaller accounts that are single purpose or like project based, I'm going to have service limits that are probably more reasonable. Because we had that legacy account, and then when we moved over to the new shiny monolith, is basically what we did, if we're being honest. We had such high spend, we had to push our service limits up so high, and we were doing so much burst computing for like web crawlers that spinning up 200 nodes wasn't out of the ordinary, right?
Yeah.
But to answer your question, like, what have cloud providers done? I mean, Amazon's changed a lot in the last 6-7 years. You can do like OUs, where you've got, your master payer account, and then you've got an AWS org. And you can have, like, this was a dev project. So first off, we should have probably never let somebody spin up a 200 node air quotes dev cluster. Probably should have limited that to more like 30. But again, it's really hard to run tests against almost a petabit data set in dev, right? At some point, you got to run a real test so you know that's going to work.
Yeah.
But you can do sandbox accounts that have budgets. You can limit the services that they're turned on. So like say, for example, I've got a dev OU. Like this is what we do at Observian. Every single employee has their own sandbox account. And, you know, we run reports on them and we can see the spend. We kind of leave it pretty open, but other organizations we work with, we lock it down. One of them has, everybody that has a sandbox account has a $1,000 a month budget. So the second they hit $1,000, it will stop. They can't do anything more, right? Also, by doing infrastructure as code, lots of Terraform, we've worked on stuff where either through Lambda automations, where you can have a tagging strategy where you can use that for programmatic things like, hey, run this Lambda. Anything that doesn't have a persist tag, destroy it. I've seen people do that. There's also, hey, if it's not in the Terraform master branch, destroy it, because we're just going to run Terraform apply with whatever's in the master branch. Anything that's not there, we're getting rid of. You know, like if you just run a TF destroy in your dev environments, if you enforce your team to work with infrastructure as code because you're always blowing environments away, it's kind of like they get in that practice. Like we got infrastructure as code. I could have a database get deleted out from under me and I don't care because I'll just run my Terraform again, right? So does that make sense? I know it's kind of all over the place.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense.
And I think you could also add that. I mean, I don't know if it's all in the same realm, but I'm just trying to think with Andy's hat on, right? Because Andy does a lot of these pipelines and workshops and things where if you're going to, and you mentioned infrastructure as code, if you're going to run this test and you create that 200 node system with code, you can also have at the end of your test another script run that tears it down. Again, now that puts it on the individual developer to make sure that's best practice, but that could be an organizational enforcement or organizational practice that gets spread and put in at an organizational level. But at least, but what you're mentioning is more of a brute force kind of, let's go for everyone who's not following the rules. We're just going to go ahead and delete it. So it's almost the strategy I like to, I never quite have the heart to do, but I always want to take with my daughter in her messy room. It's like, hey, if I go in your room after you say you clean it, anything on the floor, I'm just going to throw out, similar kind of thing, as opposed to her actually cleaning up and doing it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, so the way, we at some point had a system in place where when a resource came online, if it wasn't tagged, we would notify you because we could at least see who it was. That's the nice mode, right?
Yeah.
But when I'm starting to work on cloud reduction, because every 10 grand I save is one more employee I get to keep, I don't really care. I'm not being nice at that point. I'm doing what it takes to keep my team together. So if you violate it, I delete your resource and I don't care. If you wanted it, you should have done what I told you. It's kind of the mentality we got into. And I mean, it takes a lot of discipline to reduce your spend by that much in under a year. Like we did all of that in 6 to 7 months. So not only is it a huge number, but it was that's all we did. Some of us were literally sleeping at the office. Back to the big data causes big problems stuff. We had so much data. We were notorious for killing database engines, right? So another one of that same project we were working on it. Okay, we failed with the Presto thing. We ended up in Athena, but then it was we got to tackle these web crawlers. They are written in Haskell. Nobody hears a Haskell dev. Customers are asking for new features. So one of the guys that works for me now, I don't know if it was the best thing I ever did for him or the worst thing, but I feel like he gained a lot out of it. I assigned him the task of re-platforming our web crawlers. And I mean, just to give you an idea of how cheeky this code was, there was a method called Batman, and all of the variables were n, 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 a, n, 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 a. So no.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
That's
the guy who wrote it. Right. So the guy who wrote it He kind of didn't care about what the next person behind him was going to see. It was the way we looked at it. So yeah, I remember I came around out of my office and he's like, "Hey, check this out." And he showed me the Batman method. And I was like, "Wait, what? It's actually in production?" He's like, "Yeah, what am I supposed to do with this?" I'm like, "Well, you were supposed to reverse engineer and figure out how it worked, but that's useless. I guess you're just going to rewrite it." So he had to figure out how to control Chromium and all that. But where I'm going with this is one of the choke points that we had was the database. So this web crawler would be like going out, scanning the site, it's getting a bunch of data. If we hold on it too long, now it's a massive payload. When we had all these web crawlers that were coming up dynamic, eventually this led to something I built with spots. This was before Spotins was the thing. So I'll get to that in a minute. But we were writing it to a relational database. Well, that relational database became a choke point. And so we get the great idea of, hey, let's take out the relational database and let's start writing these files to S3. Well, yeah, we fixed the database problem, but we destroyed our big data pipeline. So the Hadoop processes that we were working with, at the time, that one might have been post Athena. I don't really remember, but I can tell you what the problem is. Instead of having a relational database that then got batched into chunked files that were easy to read and process, we had millions of tiny little files, and MapReduce is not good at reading tiny little files. So we basically took the problem of, here's a database that's, causing us to slow down and it's throttling our throughput. So, hey, now we can scan really quick, but now we can't process the data that we just collected. So this is one where you solve one problem and you make the other problem bigger. That's why I said big data causes big problems.
Yeah, so you shifted the real problem just to another piece of the architecture in the end.
Yeah. And so what ended up happening is we had to batch those back together just so you could process them.
Yeah. Hey, I wanted to make one comment on Batman because I find it interesting. But, case in point, I mean, maybe this was really an interesting developer. Could also be that he just obfuscated his code in case it was running in production, because the N_NANN could also be code obfuscation, but maybe he threw away the original code. Just something that came up. Maybe he was not that evil. Maybe he just used.
No, it's literally called Batman.
Okay, I was really.
I was going to say, come on, Andy's trying to cut him some slack. So the thing I get out of that though is
rage quit and kind of sent a company-wide email announcing it in like the double middle finger walking out the door when he left. So
okay. I would love to see somebody make a Batman framework that then if you write something that's poor performing, it gets vigilance on you. It gets you back. It comes back for vengeance with some kind of crafty thing. But yeah, that's pretty awesome.
But I would like to, Justin, I really, besides this podcast, I would like to connect you with some of our folks at Dynatrace that keep an eye on costs, because we built a couple of tools also internally. As you said, there's always new tools out there. We also built some tools that optimize the usage and give recommendations depending on the workload on what type of, let's say, EC2 instance types we should use in order to save costs. So we have, they also reduced costs massively with that approach. And also we are, just as you figured out over the years, now using proper tagging so that instances get terminated in case they're no longer needed or in case they are reaching their expiry date. So if somebody, launches a service or an EC2 instance, they have to tell the system through tags what the expiry date is. Do I need it for a day? Do I need it for a week or longer? And there might even be an approval process if it's longer than that. But by default, it's short-lived instances that then automatically get cleaned. Or maybe you, as a developer, at the end of the day, you get an email or a Slack notification saying, hey, it's almost the end of the day. I see you still have 2 instances running that you launched in the morning. Do you still need it, yes or no? And if not, or if you don't respond, that means you're probably no longer here and you don't care. So I'll just kill it. Or if you respond and say you need it longer, then the question is, do you really need them longer? I mean, there's a lot of interesting things we can do. And it's great that we share these experiences and what can be done. It's also great. There's a lot of tool vendors out there that are building new tools. We've, just as you've built your own tooling internally. We've built our own tooling internally. It's just very good that we share these stories so that people that start from scratch or start new with this technology are not making the same mistakes as we did.
Yeah, that's literally why Observian exists.
Yeah.
I mean, I try to help customers now to actually use tools. Don't write your own. I mean, I've been in the cloud space for about 10 years, so it's obviously different eras of the cloud have had different problems. As far as like what you were just talking about with like, hey, I spin something up, I put a tag on it, and then I get like, yeah, you literally described the cloud maturity model, right? That's a very mature cloud practice. But if you have a bunch of people who've never done the cloud that are treating the cloud as a data center in the sky, it's like they don't even know that they can do that. Let's be honest. To them, they just think AWS is VMs and a little bit of S3 and maybe a database.
Well, and it's also when we're currently, as you know, working on Captain and with runs obviously on Kubernetes. And when we started, we just like, hey, spin up another G-key cluster. Who cares, right? It's just a G-key cluster. What can it cost? And then we realized after a while, well, it actually, because we have, just as you said in the beginning, we do have our individual development team accounts where we can keep track of costs. And we freshly new to the Kubernetes world, especially these managed services, you don't think about the cost because you need a server and it's just 3 clicks away or an API call away and the server is there. And then you sometimes get the wake-up call a month later that, oh my God, this was really like $2,000. Oof. And I only used it for one demo at the beginning of the month.
Yeah.
Maybe I should be a little more careful in the future.
Yeah, delete those node pools, man.
Exactly.
Yeah, just out of curiosity too, with what both of you are saying, right? I imagine a lot of people start moving to the cloud and they start thinking we want to do things good. Besides hiring someone like Observian, right, to help, explain and set people up on this, are there like, I've been asking this question on a lot of podcasts. Are there like books or like how do people get started like on their own if they needed to? Or is it just like you have to know somebody or happen to catch the right webinar or something to start understanding these things? Or is there like a, best practices for managing your cloud costs kind of guidelines out there?
So a couple answers. I think more people that are willing to talk about failures like we're doing today is going to help a lot of people, assuming people are listening to this stuff.
Yep.
The other is don't get me wrong, there is best practices and white papers all over Amazon's website, but that assumes people take the time to read it.
Okay, but they at least exist. Okay.
A little bit.
So,
they're more to tell you how things work or, best practice design. I don't feel like there's like a lot of emphasis on how to do cost optimization. It's more teaching people how to like architect.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things that I've learned that, if I could go back in time that I wish I would have done is every person on my team. I mean, I don't even care if you pass the AWS certs, but we should have had everybody at least do the dev associate and maybe the architect associate. Like, I'm not a huge fan of certs. It's just a piece of paper that says you can pass a test.
Yeah.
But the test prep that you go into when you're doing like a AWS SA Pro or SA Associate, it exposes you to a lot of different things about the platform, how to design things, and it gets you thinking different earlier. And I think just that alone is worth it. I don't even care if they pass the test, just giving them that exposure. Because, I mean, I can tell you crazy stories about when we first got started because we had that mindset of, it's just data center in the sky, right? We were hosting like our own RabbitMQ services. We had a Microsoft high performance computing cluster, like all this stuff that we just didn't need. Like SQS is sitting right there. It's one of the base services, and we had our own queuing system that was self-hosted. Why?
Mm-hmm.
I also run into a lot of customers like, I'm going to try to say this in the nicest way possible, but have you seen architectures and systems that look like resume building projects? They're not like actually a thing.
I've never
Like,
I love that description.
I never used that description. I like the description. Yeah.
Because like I was listening to your guys' episode with Kelsey Hightower the other day, and
Yeah.
I mean one of the things that he said that like I just want to hug the guy because he's so right is he's like, don't use Kubernetes for everything. It's gotten so much hype. It's like everybody's got this K-shaped hole and they're just trying to stamp out everything. It's like, guys, there's times to use serverless. There's times to use an EC2 instance. There's times to use Kubernetes. Don't get me wrong, I love me some containers, but there's more to life than containers. Container orchestration is hard. That is another thing that we botched in the early days. So like right as I was on my way out and just starting Observian, one of the projects I was working on, because we were, a monolith at the time, but not really a monolith. We had multiple monoliths that ran on the same web heads and the same API heads because it was a .NET shop. So we were running web API. So I was starting to go down the path of like, how do I stop having a web farm and like an API farm, and I start having like app farms. And so we started moving like our JWT tokens. So we were trying to get to a single auth platform so we could have microsites. Like this is how you get to micro architectures, but keep in mind we have production data going through there. So I was getting to the point where, the model was going to be, we have a load balancer in front of every application that's just for that application. So this is literally, I don't need to describe to you guys about microarchitectures, but it's like, this is why they exist. If the login service is getting hammered, but the reporting service is like not being used, or vice versa, like only scale up what's being used. So like, let's get more login boxes. Like, let's not spin up the entire system because it all runs on, the same web farm.
Mm-hmm.
And so that then was setting us up into containers. And so I was like on my way out, so I didn't get big into containers there. But they started going down the path of, let's do some containers. And this is one that I run into with customers all the time. And I mean, I tell customers, if somebody tells you container orchestration is easy, they're lying to you. They've never done it, because it's not easy. Like it's not rocket science, but it's difficult, right? It's a lot more than going to docker.com, reading a tutorial, downloading it, and like, hey, look, I've got an image on my laptop. I've seen many devs containerize their projects, and then they're like, hey, look, we have containers. It's like, well, yeah, that's not how you're going to run it in production, right? So we botched that one. I don't have a good gory story from that one because I was like on my way out and we'd already sold the company. Like that was part of the Cinderella story, right? Doing really well, get some heartbreak, reduce the spend, and we were able to, exit the company. It's still alive and kicking today. And so I don't know where I was going with that, other than like when Kelsey Hightower was saying, don't use Kubernetes everywhere. I'm seeing kind of the same thing happen in the serverless space, because I talked about serverless last time here, where it's like they see a shiny object and they want to use it for everything because it's like their new tool, or the opposite, the use case doesn't really fit, but they want to say that they've done it for their resume. So now I've got some tiny little project with a massive Hadoop cluster or a massive Kubernetes cluster, or I've got something that's pretty complicated and hard to maintain because we took it full serverless when containers was probably the better option, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of one of the things, like this isn't really a failure story, but it is like in my mind, failures that I see out in the wild when I'm interacting with customers, that like just take a second to understand the use case and really design the system. Like that's one of the things that I like about cloud. I don't have to make everything the same. On-prem, yeah, I might be married to, I only get VMware and SQL Server. It's like, okay, that kind of sucks if I want to do a big data project. But in the cloud, I don't have that limitation, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm kind of going with that too. Is like one of the other things, like this is kind of like an obvious one now, but back in the day, it really wasn't. AWS IAM roles, people need to promote and preach that. Like if you learn nothing today, learn that. Like do not have API keys like
you're producing console users that you put in a config file in your code, and then you deploy your application. Just give the host an IAM role. It just makes your life so much easier. So we didn't do that the first time, obviously. So we were like, oh yeah, API keys, put it in our app config file. What could go wrong? Well, somebody checked one of those keys into a public repo in GitHub. Now, we were fortunate enough that nobody hijacked it and turned us into a Bitcoin farm, but we caught it pretty quick. But now, instead of just, killing that role and making a new role, well, I mean, if we would have had a role, it would have been exposed anyways. We now had to go figure out which applications were using this key and update and redeploy them all. Like, we were literally redeploying code because of a configuration issue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And if you remember last time I was on, we were talking about secrets management, and that's like a topic that I said, hey, we should dive into. So I'm not going to get into a full secrets management conversation, but there's tools like SSM Parameter Store, AWS Secrets Manager, HashiCorp's Vault. I'm just saying use them. Because when you start doing things at scale, the risk is very high. Like, one of the things about going into these microarchitectures, in a monolith, I've got, one config file that might have 50 secrets, maybe 100 if it's a bigger app. If I break that down into microservices, I now probably have 100 config files.
That's amazing.
That I have 2 to 3 secrets in each. Like, it's like secrets overload, right? And you got to protect these secrets, because otherwise you get ransomware.
Do it now.
You get Bitcoin miners. And we literally were supposed to be, in a situation where we were growing through our cloud maturity. And yeah, we had an intern. It was an intern that actually checked that into
It's
a public
always
bucket.
an intern. It's always an intern, I tell you.
Well, then that's that same time, though.
Was it an intern named Justin?
No, definitely not. I do bigger failures like $30,000 clusters. Come on. But so we had that same time, I think Visual Studio had a bug where by default, if you use the Visual Studio extension, it was making repos public. And there was like a news article where somebody's account got compromised, and Microsoft and Amazon worked together to like make sure that guy didn't have to pay all that. So I don't know, man. Like, I'm not trying to roll an intern over. It's just the facts. It sucks. But what scared us is here's what was so crazy. There's some company out there that was indexing GitHub. They found the credentials, and they notified us within like 5 minutes. And so the thing that keeps me up at night is if the good guys found it in 5 minutes, how many bad guys found it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so that could have been a huge disaster. We got lucky on that one.
Yeah.
And just to support that intern who had the problem, one of the best things that can happen to you early on is a problem like that, because you'll probably never make a mistake like that again. So it's, unless you're just really, someone who does not learn from mistakes, which there are people out there, but, whenever you have one of those situations, you're going to be looking a lot more closely at everything you do from that period on. And it's a great lesson to learn early on. So hopefully you didn't go too hard on them.
Oh, definitely not. Like, it's one of those things where if you fail and you admit you failed, like, I'm good. Just let's fix it. But if you try to hide it, I'll fire you. It's that simple. So another like to that point, like one of my early jobs when I was like a junior DBA, I wasn't the one that hit F5, but I could have been. You remember the practice of like, you got your database management studio and like you connect to production instance. Oh, and then this other tab might be connected to like dev. Mm-hmm. Guy sitting next to me who was like mentoring me and teaching me, he's like goes to run a query, and all of a sudden a bunch of explicitives come from his direction. And I look over at him. And I was like, "What happened?" He's like, "I just dropped a table in production." I was like, "Oh, which one?" He's like, "The table," because I mean, this is a failure this isn't even related to cloud, but it's a failure that it was a life lesson, like you were saying. Like I'm now trying to be super careful anytime I'm doing this type of stuff. But we had a bunch of inbound claims coming in, and this was the main table that was like, what status is it at?
because we were a claims clearinghouse at the job I was at. Yeah, and they dropped that. So it was like, hey, get pizza and sleeping bags. We're not going home until this table gets recovered.
Wow.
So I've seen those happen firsthand, but yeah, they stick with you. Like I can recall a bunch of those.
Hey, Justin, I mean, I think we could probably talk on for hours and hours because you're a treasure trove of, I don't want to say a treasure trove of failures, but a treasure trove of wisdom.
You've just failed so much in life.
No, yeah.
Compliment.
No, but it's
like I should be.
No, it's a compliment.
You're
it's a compliment.
so good at failing, Justin.
No, but this is phenomenal. I would really love, as I said earlier, get you in touch with our internal teams here at Dynatrace, who are also constantly increasing our maturity model. I think we are already pretty mature, based at least also from the feedback that you gave me earlier when I explained some of the things we are doing. But there's always more we can do, and I'm pretty sure they will be excited to talk to you. And I'm pretty sure there's more people out there that are now listening to this podcast who also want to get in touch with you. So could you quickly repeat how people can find you? What's the best way to get a hold of you?
Yeah, so Observian.com. That's OBSERVIAN.com is our website. I mean, if you want to email me directly, this is probably a bad idea, but it's Justin@Observian.com. Mm-hmm. You can also hit me up on LinkedIn. It's Justin Donohoo. Pretty unique last name. It's pretty
Donohoo.
Yep, it's pretty easy. But yeah, this is one of those things where we just like to help people. Like, I kind of found my calling doing this stuff. Like when I was at Ghostery, I was kind of going through some rough patches. I got to the point where I was so dedicated to that job. I had so much fun, and it was probably one of the best places I've worked. Got a lot of lifelong friends out of it. Mm-hmm. It was just one of those experiences where it was like, by the end of it, I was like, yeah, this is what I want to do. And so, like, obviously I don't do it for free, but if I was independently wealthy, I totally would. I just like helping people, like in the tech space. When people ask what I do for a living, I'm like, I'm kind of like a tech therapist. I show up, kind of understand people's use cases, what they're doing. Sometimes it's culture related, and like I got a customer that they're going through a culture issue right now, and there's some fun separations with some Jira projects. It's going to be fun, but I don't know. It's just what I like to do. So I'm always willing to help. So if somebody wants to jump on and have a chat, I'm down to do that anytime.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure we'll call you up again for one of the future episodes, because it was extremely great last time when we had you on serverless, and now this was just phenomenal as well.
We need to negotiate some sneakers, though.
Yeah,
that at performance.
Yes, sneakers or some captain swag or whatever you want.
Sneaker.
I had Jürgen out in my office. We did a captain workshop, and it was pretty fun. And he showed up without swag again, and like I kind of he came with 2 T-shirts to like a 12-man workshop. I did con him into giving me some captain stickers, and I made him put an Observian sticker on his laptop because I put a captain sticker on my laptop. So I mean, it wasn't a waste. It was definitely great. Yeah, that was one of my favorite things to do right now.
That's awesome to hear. Well, this is Jürgen probably, right? He asked me right before he went on site, is there more swag? And it was just at the time when we were really low on swag, especially after Perform. So, but there's more coming. So don't worry, you'll get your swag. You get your shirts, you get your sweaters. And thanks for helping us on that project as well.
I thought you said shorts, Captain Shorts. That'd be great.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
You know what you need to do, Andy? You need to create for whoever's going to be the biggest captain advocate and who uses the greatest stories and all that. You need to have a single pair of Captain Lederhosen.
Oh, look at that! Yeah,
that somebody can get.
Yeah, we are actually thinking about a Captain community champion that is constantly contributing to the Captain community on a regular basis, and then champions get a little more. I mean, Lederhosen sounds like an awesome idea.
Well, when captain uniforms get released, we could like make a captain uniform that's something ridiculous, like that's embarrassing, and make them wear it. Right?
Andy'll do it.
All right.
Okay, well, Justin, thank you so very, very much, and listeners, thanks for we've been having some audio challenges. I think with everybody using up bandwidth at home, our traditional means of recording wasn't working today, so we had to make a last minute swap out. So thanks for bearing with us and hanging in there. Hopefully things will settle down with the audio. Justin, thank you so much for joining us, and I'm glad you're not. I remember when I saw you perform, you were sick, and then when I talked to you after to set this up, you were like, "I got sick again." So hopefully you're out of the woods for you've done your time. So
yeah, I've just got one more last thing to say before we call this one quits.
Oh yeah.
This is one that I think everybody should just do. It seems obvious, but design for failure. Like, just assume it's going to fail. It's going to happen. So just a quick side story. I'll promise this will be quick. One of our products that I was telling you about that was doing the compliance stuff, it supported about 20 million a year in revenue. And when we rewrote it to work with the new data pipeline, we made sure that we designed the system to have attached storage that could last up to 7 days of no S3, because it was taking the data in. It would take out people's like personal identifiable information before it wrote it. Well, if S3 was down, we wanted to write local and then push it in. And, people are like, oh, but S3's got 11 nines. Well, you remember that day the S3 went down in Virginia? Virginia was our production. So we got lucky. That was not us being geniuses. That was us just taking the design for failure, because it's going to happen.
Yeah.
We could have lost thousands of dollars for every, minute that S3 was down. Instead, when S3 came back up, it pushed it right in like it never even was down. It was awesome. So just design for failure. It's going to happen.
Yeah, and on that note, too, we've been having several of our guests recently have been talking on the topic of chaos engineering and chaos testing. And it sounds, that falls into that realm. I'm just curious, are you
Chaos Monkey?
Are you all implementing chaos testing with any of your customers, or is that something you've really gone into yet?
So I would love to be doing chaos engineering everywhere I go. It's when I'm in charge of a product development group, it's always fun trying to get people to buy in. It's very much a culture thing. And then for customers, some of our customers are there, they can do it. But a lot of it's, again, back to the maturity model. I got to get you into CI/CD self-healing architecture before I'm going to start doing chaos engineering, right?
Yeah.
But just a quick plug for somebody, Nora Jones, not the singer. She's used to be at Netflix. I believe she's at Slack now. She spoke at reInvent before. She's part of the chaos engineering team from Netflix. I believe she's at Slack now. She has a book that is part of it. You should definitely read that. If you're into chaos engineering, check her out. She's awesome.
All right, excellent. All right, we got to wrap up now. Andy's got to run. We'll hopefully talk to you soon.
Yep.
Thank you so much, and thanks for everyone for listening. And if you have any topics, again, you can reach us at pure_DT on Twitter, or you can send us an email at pureperformance@dynatrace.com. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.